consider buying your processed oboe and bassoon cane from those friendly folks over at Barton Cane. Processed with care and precision for your everyday reed-making needs. Take the pain and injury out of reed-making by letting Barton Cane do the hard, repetitive, boring stuff. Free up time for practicing, happy hours, hikes, baking, and spending time with friends and family. Barton Cane, here for you. Visit www.bartoncane.com.
Specializing in the finest assortment of oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and their accessories, RDG Woodwinds serves musicians around the world. Their employees are all professional musicians who have a deep knowledge of the products that they sell. RDG's repair shop has an international reputation with a combined 100 plus years of service among the 5 repair technicians. Plain and simple, RDG provides excellent products and fabulous customer service. Visit them at rdgwoodwinds.com. They look forward to working with you.
Hi, I'm Galit Kaunitz.
And I'm Jackie Wilson, and you're listening to Double Reed Dish,
a podcast for oboists,
bassoonists,
and the people who love them.
We're both zombie women, I feel.
Zombies.
Right now.
I did just wake up from a nap.
Oh, I'm jealous. I'm considering taking a nap after this.
Because it's summer and we can.
It is delightfully summer.
Mm-hmm.
Although we're, as we've mentioned before, we just send voice memos back and forth all day. And as we were memoing yesterday, summer is delightfully boring.
Mm-hmm.
And so when life slows down, although I guess it's not really slowing down for you, I'll speak for myself, but it's like, oh, okay, yes, I finally have like a little bit of time to rest and relax. And then that continues and you're like, I'm a little bored.
Well, what have you been doing with your summer besides being delightfully a little bit bored?
Well, my biggest project, bassoon-wise, I was going to say, send me your book recommendations, which I still want, but I was like, it is a double read podcast. Maybe we should keep it relevant to the bassoon and the oboe. Has been, so I got grant funding. Oh gosh, I guess it must have been over a year ago now, to commission a concerto for bassoon and strings from Connor Chi. Have I mentioned this on the podcast? You and I talk about it, so I can't remember if I actually have. But yes, I was able to commission a concerto for bassoon and strings by Connor Chi, who is a Navajo composer that I've collaborated with before. He was part of the Double Reed Dish Consortium. Mm-hmm. And I just love his works. They're so beautiful.
Gorgeous.
They're cinematic and
emotional.
Yes, just they have so much artistic depth. And he and I talked when we were conceiving of this piece, and I was like, there are certain things that I feel are missed opportunities when people commission concertos that I want to make sure we account for. And the biggest one is that a lot of times when concertos are commissioned, life beyond soloist with orchestra is not as considered as maybe it would be ideally. So, lots of concertos exist that don't have piano reductions or don't have reasonable piano reductions, or the idea that, students might need this for a recital and not have, if we want this to be relevant to students, we need to have an option that doesn't require a orchestra to be at one's beck and call, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about how the Vivaldi concertos for bassoon, you'll see people put those on a recital stage with one on a part, like string quartet, and they work beautifully. Mm-hmm. And so we intentioned that, yes, there would be a version for bassoon and strings, but there would also be a version for string quartet and a version for piano accompaniment.
Amazing.
And that got delivered in March. And I'm very lucky that 6 different orchestras have programmed the piece. And the first one is coming up in about 2 weeks. I will premiere on June 12th. So I've been mostly working on making reads and reads and reads and reads for that, and practicing and memorizing it. And actually, last week I had my first rehearsal. The first orchestra I'm playing with is a group called the Ravenna Strings, which is a ensemble in Seattle. So we drove over to Seattle, had the first rehearsal. It was awesome. I did not have any memory slips, which I was really concerned about. You know what I mean? The first time you go off book, it can be a little like, ah. But it was really, really great. And so that has been my main musical focus. And I'm just so excited to share this piece with audiences. I'm going to be playing it at IDRS. And I did write a big grant for it. So I'll tell you the truth. I negotiated quite an extended period of performance exclusivity and first right to record.
Good.
But I fully anticipate that people will be, what is the phrase? I keep thinking like, oh, chomping at the bit. I was like jarring at the
Jarring at the jam jar.
Chomping at the bit to get access to it because it's just so great. So I've been immersing myself in the wonderful world of Connor Chi, napping and playing with my dog.
That sounds amazing.
It's not bad as far as summers go. How about you? Give us the moving update, the Galit moving update.
Oh, well, we are under contract on the house.
Yeah.
And we are closing in a week. And then we are going to be a little bit in the wind until we find a new place to live.
Closing in a week means you got to be out of the house in a week,
We're
right?
out of the house in a week. Yeah.
Holy moly.
Holy moly. But we are going to spend a lot of the summer in Tucson. So Tucson oboists, let's hang out. We have family there and a place to stay. So Tucson it is. It's everyone's dream to summer in Tucson, right, Jackie?
Tucson in June and July. Isn't that the dream?
Oh man. But so the plan for the next week is just to get moved out of the house.
Yeah.
But what I have been doing double read wise is making sea level reads.
Yeah.
Because I have a week of high humidity sea level left. So my goal is to have a full box of mostly finished or, good potential sea level reads that I can use for whatever comes up, because I have a feeling that it is going to be harder to go from altitude to sea level than the other way around in terms of reads. So I want to make sure that I'm, prepared in case I have opportunity to come back to sea level. So that, you can always make reads once you're there, but you don't want to sound like a dum-dum when you first land. So
that's my job. Sounding like a dumb. No. Yeah, it's difficult because Pullman's kind of medium elevation. Obviously, we both travel quite a bit. You're about to go live somewhere high elevation. It's always interesting trying to anticipate the changes and everything, because I also feel like there's how your reads change going from one place to the other. But I also feel like when I was, for example, at LSM and I would make reads there at sea level approximately, they would also change just being brought to the higher elevation. You know what I mean? Like,
are they going to even make it?
Right. Or will they remember when you bring them back to their place of origin? Like,
yeah. But at least they won't be over scraped is what I'm thinking.
So you had like a measure, a reference point.
Yeah.
As opposed to the reference point you're not going to have or be trying to find when you go to Fort Collins.
Right. Because at altitude, you have to scrape more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be hard to gauge.
Yeah, I remember when I moved, Pullman's not insanely high elevation, but it's slightly elevated. And I remember when I moved from Cape Girardeau, which was on the Mississippi River, feeling a little bit like it was definitely a reacclimation period.
Mm-hmm.
And I also noticed when I got here, like pressure almost became a more significant variable
Mm-hmm.
than elevation, or at elevation, I felt pressure
They
so
have
much
to be
differently.
easier. Yeah.
Well, just going from one room to another. Like I
Right.
remember posting on my stories, like, why when I play in my office does the read feel one way? And then I go up to the concert hall and it feels completely different. And it was actually Ryan Roberts DM'd me and was like, yeah, if the air pressure in this room is different than that room, or
Mm-hmm.
that type of thing, one
Oh, I see
building
what
to
you're saying.
another, yeah, you can
Mhm.
really feel that temperature, like it's because the air's thinner, so every other variable
Is more intense.
impacts it more.
Yeah.
So it's just
Oh,
very
that makes
difficult
sense.
to gauge. But I will say that has liberated me. I used to be like Old Faithful. Here's the best read in my case. This is what I will play on. I would like
Uh-huh.
decide, here's my concert read or whatever. And since coming here, I'm a lot more, oh, I thought I'd play on this read, but I soaked up a bunch today and this read's the better
Yeah,
one. And just a lot less deciding ahead of time,
that's good.
which can take some of the seriousness, or I guess anticipation, out of
Yeah.
it a little bit.
Yeah,
You have to
that's
just
really
be
good.
more go with the flow.
Yeah. So that is, I'm really good at going with the flow.
Well, I am too.
But since we're going to be in Tucson, it gives me the opportunity to sneak up to Flagstaff and try to make some reads up there, if you know what I mean.
I'm definitely jealous of that.
Mm-hmm.
My Flagstaff read making approach is going to be prayer, uh, hopefully some karma, good vibes. We'll
Well,
see.
do you remember when we played in Santa Fe?
Mhm.
The only read that worked for me was a read that had completely open sides in Hattiesburg.
I have been putting aside ones that here I'm like, ugh, that's way too stiff. That's way too tough. I have
Mm-hmm.
been putting aside and been like, don't get rid of those quite yet. Let's go ahead and take those on down to flag. And
Mm-hmm.
so we shall see.
It'll be an adventure.
Yes, it'll be an adventure.
And you just get ready because I have been sending you my stressy texts and you're about to get so much more. So much more.
Well, the next time we talk to the listeners, you will be in Arizona? Question
Uh-huh.
mark?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so we will report back
Yep.
then, live from Tucson.
Chemical City Double Reeds is a full-service double reed shop specializing in the sale of instruments, cane, accessories, and sheet music. Double Reed Dish listeners can enjoy free shipping with code DRDISH. Visit them in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or online at www.chemicalcityreeds.com.
AC/DC Reads is a one-woman bassoon reed workshop in Minnesota run by Dr. Ariel Detweiler, producing over 1,500 reeds per year. Selling beginner bassoon reeds, advanced bassoon reeds, and contrabassoon reeds, AC/DC Reads are hailed by customers for their even intonation, ease of response in all registers, warm tone quality, and strong low register. Every reed is made from tube cane processed in-house to Ariel's specifications using Rigati or Lavaro cane and a Rieger 1A shape. You'll also find bassoon-themed gifts in the shop, including greeting cards, stickers, artistic prints, and the ever-popular Black Wing bassoon pencil. Make sure to follow AC/DC Reads on Instagram, where Ariel posts artistic photos and educational stories about her everyday experiences with reed making. AC/DC Reads is a proud sponsor of Double Reed Dish, sharing positive and uplifting interviews to inspire and connect the bassoon community around the world. Find AC/DC Reads at www.acdcreads.com or at retailers like Chemical City Double Reeds, Midwest Musical Imports, or Reed Supplies Canada. Try out AC/DC Reads today and let the reed do the work. So before we send you all over to our awesome interview with Michael Sweeney, You'll notice that at the end of the interview, he talks to us about some of the projects he is excited for with retirement. And he actually wrote us to say that he forgot to mention one very cool thing that we want to put on your radar, which is that Michael plans to publish drawings and descriptions of the custom key work that you're about to hear more about in the IDRS journal. So if his discussion of his custom key work piques your interest, be on the lookout for that. And without further ado, here's our interview with Michael Sweeney.
We are ecstatic to welcome to the podcast Michael Sweeney, principal bassoon of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
We always love to start by asking our guests how they began playing their instrument. So could you tell us how you were introduced to the bassoon?
Well, I have to tell you that my background is Irish, and we Irish are big storytellers. So almost every question you ask is going to be answered in the form of a story.
Love it.
When I was very young, I was a boy, my mother asked me if I would like to have piano lessons. And with no particular enthusiasm, I said, sure. And at a certain point, my piano teacher told me about somebody that she knew who was a bassoonist. And I asked, what was that? And she drew a little bassoon in my weekly book. And I thought it looked, kind of amazing, and didn't really think much about it. And then as I discovered classical music, and the first music that I discovered was either, piano music or the Beethoven symphonies, I began to hear this sound that I thought was kind of remarkable. And my public library had all 9 of the Beethoven symphonies in score. And so I checked those out, and I began to know the Beethoven symphonies just by hearing them, and really fell in love with it, and eventually figured out that line that was marked as fagotto was the bassoon. And then I remembered that I had seen a little picture of it my piano teacher had drawn. So I got more and more fascinated with it. Well, fast forward to grade 9, I guess grade 10. And I sat down on day 1 in French class, and there was a girl sitting in front of me. And we said hello, and I recognized her as somebody who played the double bass in the school string orchestra. And so I confessed to her that I thought it was really cool that she played the double bass, and that I had always wanted to play the bassoon. And she just, she thought that was interesting, and I thought that was the end of it. The next day she came in, she said, I talked to the band director about you, and the school has a bassoon that you could check out, and you could learn to play the bassoon. And the band director said, you better get that boy in here. So she took me that day to meet the band director, and I can still remember him pulling the bassoon case off the shelf and opening it up for me. I remember it was a Kohler bassoon. I remember the look of it, the smell of it. And he gave me a fingering chart, and he showed me where to hold my hands. And he said, okay, go to it, sport. See you in January for concert band. Because of course it was marching band season at that time. So that's how I came to the bassoon. I recently was in touch with, through Facebook, was able to find this girl who sat in my class, and now she's a grown up, and I was able to thank her for being a mover and shaker in my life.
That's amazing.
Isn't that a great story?
Yeah. Does she still play? Does she still play the
bass?
bass?
No. She's gone into all kinds of other things like community organizing. Her mother was very active in our community as a community organizer, and she's just one of those people who her business is to make things happen.
And she did it.
Yeah, she did it.
Well, so you've finally got your bassoon. Maybe it's safe to assume it lived up to all of your greatest expectations. Yeah. Can we hear about what made you decide to pursue this professionally, and maybe a bit about your training and educational journey?
So I played for those 3 years in high school, and I progressed quickly because from the piano, I already read music. So I wasn't struggling with bass clef. And because I had been looking at the Beethoven symphony scores for years before I even got my hands on a bassoon, I had seen the tenor clef. And I nobody told me what it meant, but I worked it out for myself by listening. I figured, okay, it's a C, is marked on that particular line. And so right away, on day one, I could read the fingering chart easily and understand tenor clef. I mean, in high school band repertoire, there isn't much tenor clef, but there's a little. And the band director was impressed with how quickly I was taking to it. And he also was the conductor for the city youth orchestra. And so I got into that quite quickly. And then that's not because of amazing talent. That's because there was nobody left to play. There just wasn't anyone around. So I was, in over my head, but, that's how you learn, is by going into situations where you're in over your head. So I'm not sure at what point, but I guess late in high school, I got fixated on the idea that this would be a wonderful way to actually make my way in life. There were a few other things that had interested me. I had toyed with medicine, architecture, computers, but I got very excited about music and about the bassoon. So my family didn't have a lot of money. My parents made it very, very clear that they were not going to help with the expense of buying an instrument. So I used this high school-owned instrument for a long time. And then I investigated going to the university that was very close to my parents' home, literally a 10-minute drive away. And it turned out they owned bassoons. And so I thought, well, if I go there, then at least I have an instrument until I can, somehow find the money to buy my first bassoon. So I made contact with a student there, and he was a senior student. He was in university on the GI Bill, and so he was older than most university students. And he sort of got me on a good path. And at a certain point, he said, I think you should study with my teacher, who was the player on faculty at California State University, Fullerton. And so I made contact with her, and ultimately I ended up enrolling at Fullerton. And here's another sort of amazing story. On day one of my first year, I learned that the university owned two Heckel bassoons. Now, they would have been acquired in the 1950s when I have no idea how much they cost, but not very much money, right? And so I also learned that day that an education major had left this Heckel bassoon in her school locker over the summer break. And lo and behold, it had been stolen. And so they gave her another one. She got the other Heckel bassoon. And, I thought this was insane, but it wasn't my place to say. She was a third or fourth year student, and I was first year. And I think they gave me a collart, to use. And she finally, after a couple of weeks of playing together, she said, well, I've been doing some thinking, and I really think that since you're a performance major, that you ought to have this Heckel bassoon. So let's trade bassoons. And I was beside myself with gratitude. So I used a 10,000 series Heckel bassoon for my undergraduate degree. During that time, I managed to save enough money for a down payment. And I got my first Heckel owned completely by myself. I think I was in my 4.5 years. I went 4.5 years for my bachelor's degree, just to kind of spread it out. So that's how I came to playing a halfway decent instrument. This school was not a renowned school, as schools of music go. What I can tell you, though, is that even though I didn't go to a famous school and I didn't study with a famous teacher, I would place almost all of my success at the feet of that teacher. Her name is Kay Brightman, and I feel it's hard to even express how lucky I feel that I got a teacher this good. If they had not had a good bassoon teacher at that school, I still would have gone because it was affordable and it was near my parents' home. And I certainly couldn't afford to go away to school and pay large tuition or large living fees because I was trying to save for an instrument. Kay has long retired from the bassoon. In fact, I'm going to see her this summer. Her husband, who's passed away now, was an oboist, and both of them were members of the IDRS in their professional years. Kay, I could go on for a long time, but she was really an extraordinary teacher. She herself had lessons with Norman Hertzberg when she was an adult. She was largely self-taught when she was young, and then as an adult went to for some lessons with Hertzberg. So she got me onto his method at a young age, and that worked out very well for me. So that was my bachelor's degree, and then I, on a whim, it's so strange to hear myself say things like this, but on a whim, I went to Yale School of Music. And I had 1 year with Arthur Weisberg. It was not so successful. And I left Yale after 1 year and went to University of Southern California. And I had 1 year with Norman Hertzberg, which was very successful. And then I ended up going back for a third year of master's work with Weisberg, but not at Yale, this time at State University in New York, Stony Brook. And that year, I was better able to absorb what Weisberg had to contribute. And so after that third year, I had applied to a DMA, but I had not been, and I had been accepted. But I was also on the audition trail, and that was the year that I got my first job in the South Dakota Symphony. And I played there for 2 years before joining the Toronto Symphony, where I have been for 35 years.
So you've been in your position in the Toronto Symphony for a long and illustrious career. And I'm wondering if you could tell us about the audition process of winning that job and
Sure.
what it felt like to win.
Yeah. Well, I had a series of auditions. Orchestras, even though they play the same repertoire and often play for the same conductors, and the jobs appear very similar, different orchestras have different characters. And it seems that many of the wind players in the Toronto Symphony had more than one audition to get the job. So they had at that time, Canadian orchestras had national auditions. So they had already a Canadian audition and had not hired from that. And so they announced their first international audition. And I should back up and say that this position was the job that was vacated by David McGill, who had played in Toronto, I think no more than 2 years, maybe even less, not sure. And this is just before he went to the Cleveland Orchestra. So they'd had an unsuccessful audition to replace him. Then they had their first international audition, and I had a goal in that audition. I had a friend from university who was playing in the TS, the principal clarinetist, Joaquin Valdepeñas, and he had not heard me play since I was an undergraduate. And so my goal for that audition was just to get out from behind the curtain, that is, pass from the first round into the second, not sort of dreaming that I actually had a chance, at getting the job. And so I went in, I played very well behind a screen, and all I remember is that they asked, the first excerpt that they asked for was the beginning of the last movement of the Beethoven 9. And in my experience, players always play the F sharp too sharp and the D too low. And if anything, that interval needs to be narrow because you're in D major. And so I had said to myself, if I'm going to get one thing right at this audition, I'm going to get that first interval in the Beethoven 9 right. And I did. And I swear to you that I could feel from behind the screen, I could feel the committee relax. because I think they'd had a day of listening to problematic first intervals in the Beethoven 9. So, so the rest of that prelim audition went well. The person who had ushered me into the room, said quietly, "Very nicely done." I didn't know who he was. It turned out he was the personnel manager and principal timpanist of the orchestra. I wouldn't find that out for a long time later. I played a second round and I had a miserable second round, and I did not advance to the finals. Two players did, and they were tried out, and ultimately neither of them was hired. That fall, the Toronto Symphony found themselves without a principal bassoonist because David McGill had gone already then to Cleveland. So I was contacted by the personnel manager, and he said, "Would you like to come and play with us from September to December? You understand this is not a trial. It's not a part of the audition process. It would be just as a guest musician." And so I, jumped through the phone and, said, yes, I would love to do that. I was able to get a leave from the South Dakota Symphony for that period of time. I was able to find a sub for that period of time. And so I went, and happily there was another audition for the job while I was there. I wasn't sure I was going to take another audition for the TSO because at the time the South Dakota Symphony really didn't pay very much, and I felt I had to save money for auditions where I had a better chance. I'm a big boy, and I understood they didn't want me, and that would be fine. So the personnel manager stressed that the audition would happen while I was there, and asked, if you're here and you don't have airfare and hotel expense, would you play another audition? And I said, yes, I'd be happy to. So I played that audition, and that was the audition that I won. And then happily, the South Dakota Symphony released me from my contract, and so I was able to start then right after the Christmas break. And so that was 35 years ago.
What would you say are some of the biggest things that you have learned being in your position about what makes a great principal bassoon?
Well, I certainly can't answer that question for everybody, but answering it for myself, there are two sort of nitty-gritty technical things, and then I've learned a larger thing. The two technical nitty-gritty things, when I joined the TSO, I realized that nothing in my training had prepared me for how softly one has to play in a good orchestra. I literally had no idea. I mean, I'd seen dynamics like piano, pianissimo, pianissimo, things like that, but I didn't really understand, what would be demanded of me. That was really quite a surprise. The other big surprise was I also did not understand that sometimes when my music had a P for piano in it, on occasion, I would have to play so loud, and on other occasions with the same marking, I would have to play so softly. No idea at all. So my first couple of seasons, my first season was, I'd have to say it was rough, sort of working that out. Certainly none of my teachers deceived me. It's just that somehow it didn't make an impression on me in my schooling. So that was the nitty-gritty thing, and that would be a thing that I would stress to young players. The larger thing also comes from hearing other players, other professionals, and young players when I'm lucky enough to meet them. One thinks one knows what the most important things are before you get the job. And one really has to be open-minded about learning that you're incorrect on that. And what I kind of always suspected was that the most important thing was character and musicality. That is what the soprano Jan de Gaetani used to call being appropriate to the music. That was her definition of musicality. For her, it was singing the music the way it wanted to be sung. And I've always loved that definition, and have searched in my playing for playing my part the way my part wishes to be played. So that means you have to use a lot of imagination, and you have to try things. You have to be courageous to try things, and you have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, well, that's not so good. That didn't work. I'll try this. And I feel very fortunate to have landed a job in the Toronto Symphony where that kind of experimenting is valued. Because I think in not every ensemble is it valued. I think in some ensembles, you Monday morning at 10 a.m. you have to have the right answer, and that's not the case where I work, and I feel so fortunate. So the other thing that I stress with younger players is that yes, it has to be clean. Yes, it has to be in tune and a big dynamic range and a lovely sound. But the most important thing is that the music itself has to say something. And what it says is almost secondary to the fact that it says something. I tell young people the only unforgivable sin is getting on stage without a plan, without an idea. It's just, that's the thing that causes, well, it's tragic because it causes professional musicians to just say, what's going on? And it causes people who aren't trained in music to say, oh, I guess I just don't like classical music. And, that is a tragedy.
You have a very special bassoon, a custom-made Heckel bassoon. Would you please tell us about this incredible instrument?
I'm sorry to tell you that this is a story. So when I was coming to my 50th birthday, I said to my husband, I want to do something. I want to give myself a gift of some sort, something kind of big. And this was just over dinner. And he said, well, can I encourage you to do something crazy? Do something like really extravagant. Don't worry about cost. Don't worry about if it's wise. Don't worry about anything. Just do something nutty. And around that time, I had tried a superb. I should back up and say that at the time I was playing on a 13,000 series Heckel, and a very good instrument that now lives in Germany. And it was easily an instrument that I could have finished my career on. So around that time, I had been trying some brand new Heckel bassoons, and I was really impressed with some of the improvements that they had made. And there were three instruments in particular, one owned by Nadina Mackey-Jackson, and then two that were being sold by the widow of Bob Danziger in San Francisco, or the Bay Area. And all three of those instruments really, really caught my attention. But I hadn't been thinking in terms of getting a new bassoon, and I played a good bassoon, so I didn't really need one. Well, then my 50th birthday comes, and when Peter said, go crazy, do something extravagant, I thought, well, that's it. I don't need a new bassoon, but I'm going to order a new bassoon. So I wrote to Heckel and got a catalog. And through the years, I had Benson Bell and Frank Marcus and Shane Wheeler add some inventions of mine to that 13,000 series instrument. And when I talked to Frank about ordering a new Heckel, he said, well, if you're going to get all those mechanisms that you've designed, you should really try to get Heckel to do that, because they will be really good at integrating it, into the standard mechanism. So I wrote to Heckel and I sent them some money, and I made it just a tentative appointment. And in 2011, I went to Wiesbaden, and I met with Ralph Reiter, who's currently the co-owner of Heckel, and I showed him my plans for a new instrument. Let's just say the meeting didn't go well. He was under a terrible amount of stress because Heckel had just had been entertaining the question, should we move to a new modern facility, or should we fix our old facility and carry on? and they decided to remain. So he was in the middle of renovation of the entire Heckel factory, and they were still making bassoons at the same time. So there were tradespeople going in and out the door, and the workers, and it was so crowded, and the office was in such a shambles that we met outside on the picnic table. So all my requests sort of pushed Ralph over the edge, and he was rather negative about it. And I'll be honest and say I considered canceling the order, and I texted my husband, who was with me on the trip but was staying at the hotel, and I said, I'm thinking about canceling. And he texted back and he said, promise me you won't cancel today. It's fine if you cancel, but don't do it today. Better to go away and think on it. Well, it was great advice, because I went away that day. It was all fine. We then began our vacation in Germany and Italy. And when I got home from Italy, there was a very nice letter from Herr Reiter saying, I've looked over your plans. We will build this bassoon with the exception of 2 of your mechanisms, which we will not build on the instrument. Well, it's fantastic that he made this decision, because in the time between my accepting his compromise and finishing the instrument, I realized that I had 2 flaws in the designs for those mechanisms. So I was able to change those drawings, and after I got the instrument in 2015, Keith Bowen installed both of those mechanisms, but the new and improved versions of them, and both of the mechanisms work really, really well. So I am beyond thrilled with this bassoon. There's another part of the Heckel story. While Ralph was looking at the drawings, one of the workers came over to ask him a question about something, and this worker looked over the drawings, but he didn't speak to me. I think the workers are not really to speak to the customers except for good morning, good night. And I found out later that the fellow who had come to look over was somebody who had been building Heckel bassoons for 50 years. Wow. He had apprenticed as a boy at Heckel and had only ever worked there. And his specialty was custom keywork. So he was getting ready to retire. And so after I was gone, he approached Herr Reiter and said, I still want to go ahead with my retirement plan, but I want to build that bassoon for Mr. Sweeney, but I'd like to do it part-time. So could I come to the factory a few days a week and build that bassoon part-time? And Herr Reiter consented. And so I feel that I have quite an exceptional bassoon, not just for the key work, but because of the bore and the wood and the tone holes and everything, because it was made by somebody, by the most senior worker in the Heckel factory. So I would say that this bassoon plays beyond my wildest hope for it. I'm extremely pleased with it. I've made a lot of modifications to it in that time, and gosh, it's wonderful to play.
I can hear our listeners screaming at
what
ask what some of these modifications are.
Okay.
What are the doodads?
Okay, so the 2 that Heckel did not accept to build, that Keith Bowen then ended up installing on the instrument. One is on the wing joint exclusively. So you can picture the link from the high A key to the whisper mechanism. Mm-hmm. So that improves the articulation and intonation and sound of high A and high B flat. You theoretically, you could put one of those same connections between the high C key and the whisper key. Mm-hmm. And what you would find if you did is that you would have a fantastic high B natural, and you would be unable to play high C. And that's why you never see a bassoon with a connection up there. Okay. So if you can improve the high B natural so dramatically with a connection like that, but caused the C and some of the higher notes to fail. Why not make a mechanism that would activate only with the high B? So I invented that. So I've got a high B whisper mechanism, and whenever you play high B, the whisper pad automatically closes, and whenever you play high C or any higher note, it opens. And when you use the C key to flick any of the notes about an octave down, likewise, the mechanism does not engage. And that's actually a bit of a drawback, or a small drawback, I should say, of the standard high A whisper, because when you use the A key to flick a natural, the whisper pad does bounce a bit. So on my custom mechanism, there's no bouncing. And then the other big mechanism that they declined is in the low range. It's a little bit on the boot, but mostly on the long joint. Jackie, when you play low E, do you always try to vent it with the low C sharp key?
Not always. I guess it depends on my dynamic level.
I always do. And I think a lot of players just regard the low C sharp key as an integral part of it. Now, always is not quite the truth, because sometimes the music is going by so fast, there's just no time, to get to it. So I might omit it, here and there. But I began to think, well, wouldn't it be interesting if I could have that done automatically? Because then I could get the single key for low C sharp and D sharp. See, the big drawback of having a single key for low C sharp and D sharp is that you can't vent low E. And if you need to play it softly, it becomes a huge challenge. Not only is it sharp, but the timbre it's brighter than all of the notes around there. And, it's just not pleasant. So I had Heckle build the single key, and so that makes, a lot of low range passages a lot easier. But I don't have the drawback of not being able to vent low E. So on my bassoon, the low E is vented automatically with the C sharp tone hole. So there's that. I'm sorry. There is a third mechanism that Heckle did build, and then I've had a good upgrade to it that Keith installed. Have you ever seen a bassoon on the boot joint, on the front of the boot joint? You can picture between the index and the middle finger, there's the high G vent. Well, on some bassoons, particularly Heckles and Foxes, although Ben Bell will also do this on a bassoon if you like, there is sometimes a high G sharp vent above your index finger. And what that means is that you can play high G sharp and high A with the low F key. And so then that means that you're playing from the F sharp below up to high C, all with your little finger on the F key. And that really stabilizes things technically. If you don't have a high G sharp ring on your bassoon, then the intonation is really quite flawed. If you do have the ring, well, in order to install the ring, Heckle has more than likely placed the first tone hole on the boot joint a little bit lower and made it a little bit larger. And the larger is to correct the intonation, since they've placed it a little bit lower. So I've played enough bassoons with this mechanism to come to the opinion that it's better to get that fourth tone hole where it belongs. This is the hole that C natural comes out of. That should really be in the acoustically correct spot and not adjusted for the mechanism. So I invented a way to have a high G sharp ring mechanism that doesn't have that extra vent above the index finger. It instead opens the C sharp triller. And so there's no extra tone hole, in the bassoon. It's just all done mechanically. So Heckle did build that mechanism, and it works beautifully. The intonation and the color of the high A is tremendous. The high G sharp color is really good, but the intonation is too sharp. And at a certain point, I accidentally discovered that if I closed the high G vent, then the intonation of those two notes was actually quite good. So Keith Bowen installed an upgrade to the mechanism I designed, And whenever the C sharp triller opens, the high G natural vent closes. So that has really made life in the high range quite happy.
Wow. So our listeners don't know this, but before we began recording, you told us that this will actually be your last season in the TSO and that you're going to be
That's right.
retiring. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit. I actually can't remember if we've ever asked someone this, but what kind of decision making goes into deciding to retire? Was it easy? Was it hard? And then maybe tell us about some of the projects you have planned post-retirement.
Yeah, retirement is such an interesting concept. Because generally, I think when you leave a symphony orchestra, it's not like you're giving up music, and I'm certainly not going to give up music or playing bassoon. But the factors that go into it are well, the obvious one is age. I'm 65, and I think hanging on to a job, I mean, I realize this may be a minority opinion, and so I'm really speaking only for myself. I do think that at a certain time, senior adults have to make way for the young. And it's a tremendous privilege and honor to play in a good orchestra and to kind of keep that for yourself, beyond a reasonable amount of time. It's a bit much, and I thought a long time ago, well, I don't ever want young people to be saying, oh my gosh, when is Sweeney going to retire? So I just decided, well, you're 65. That's kind of a standard retirement age. You're not required to retire, but maybe it would be a good time to go. My husband is 5 years older than me, and there are a lot of things that we would like to do, and we can't really do them until we're both retired. And he's retired now 1 year. So there was that factor. And so those really, that's the biggest reason. I've gotten to a certain age, and it's time to move on to other things that fascinate me. I will say that it was hard to make the decision because we have a relatively new music director. He's in his third or fourth year, and in many ways, he's the music director I've been waiting for my whole career. The thing that he stresses the most is character and imagination. And the concerts under him have just been magic, from start to finish. And so when I told him that I had a private meeting with him before officially notifying personnel, and when I told him that, I felt lucky that I could say to him, honestly, the pain that this is causing me to do this is because I've enjoyed these last years in some ways more than any of the years that I've been in the orchestra. So I'm really I'm sorry to say goodbye to Gustavo Jimeno, but I'll be in the audience cheering when he comes back to conduct my colleagues. And then in terms of after retirement projects, I've got a bunch of things. Since I was just talking about my bassoon, I'll mention that one first. Obviously, Heckel bassoons last a long time, and so at a certain point, my instrument will be sold. And I'm preparing a manual to go with it. And this manual is not a how to play it, because if you can play the bassoon, you can play this bassoon. But it's a manual for repair technicians who may work on it in the future, but also for players so that they can make minor adjustments to it and understand how it works, because one can't afford usually to go off to a repair technician monthly or, whenever any little thing, goes wrong with the instrument. So I'm writing an owner's manual basically for the bassoon, and of course that will come with the instrument. During the pandemic, we gave the Toronto Symphony gave a small concert that was live streamed, but only locally. And I played a concerto that I had fashioned after Johann Sebastian Bach's second harpsichord concerto. Sergio Azzolini has done the same thing. He based his rendition of this concerto on the precursor cantata movements that Bach borrowed in order to make his second harpsichord concerto. And Azzolini has made a beautiful recording of that. I did something slightly different. I made a comparison of Bach's original cantata movements with his harpsichord concerto, which comes 12 years later in his life. And I incorporated into my version many of the changes that he made, because he changed the orchestral accompaniment quite a lot. In some cases, he improved the counterpoint. In other cases, he changed the voice leading. So my colleagues reacted really favorably to this Bach performance. So I would I hope actually this fall, with my colleagues, just outside of the schedule, to record that Bach concerto and distribute it. Years ago, I made a recording of Mozart's concerto with three at the time, new works. And I did a lot of research in preparation for the Mozart concerto, because I had always promised myself that I would not get up in front of people and play that work until I had really made some kind of an attempt to forget everything I'd ever been taught about it, forget every performance I'd ever heard, and try to come at it fresh with only my own ideas and not a potpourri of everybody else's ideas. So the research was very interesting to me, and at the time I would talk about it with other bassoonists only because I was excited about it. I never imagined that I was trying to answer questions about the concerto for anyone other than myself. But every bassoonist I mentioned it to said, "You got to write all this down. People would find this really interesting." So I'm planning a book on Mozart's concerto. It'll be kind of a handbook for bassoonists, possibly also conductors who are going to conduct the work. But what it will not be will be a how-to, how to play the Mozart concerto, because I feel very, very strongly that anyone who tells you there's a right way or a wrong way is actually missing the entire point. I think all the recordings and all the performances should sound different from one another. Mm-hmm. And people who say, "Oh yeah, I heard so-and-so's performance, I didn't like it." I just think, well, you probably heard a good performance and it just wasn't the way you played it. And that doesn't necessarily make it bad. I actually have, you're going to love this, I actually own all of the commercial recordings of the concerto. There are over 100, and I have them all the way back to the first one from 1926. And you know what is remarkable about all these recordings? They're all different. And I would have to say on only 2 of the recordings of all of those is the playing not good. Everybody plays. You don't go onto vinyl or tape or acrylic or whatever the medium is without playing really well. Mm-hmm. So it's a book that sort of on the history of the concerto, and just with an idea of getting your creative juices flowing so that you may come to not my interpretation, but your own interpretation of the work. And then my last project, I actually started during the COVID pandemic because I had so much time. And it's nearing completion. I think it'll be done in a year or so. I once joked with Norman Hertzberg that when I was playing the Mildy scale and arpeggio studies, I said, Mr. Hertzberg, I don't feel like my technique is getting better. I just feel like I've memorized these pieces, so I can play them faster, but my technique has not actually improved. And he laughed, and he said, "Well, it is improving." And then we both said something like, wouldn't it have been great if Mildy had left us these etudes, but in every key, because there are only the 25 of them. And so that was a long time ago, but it planted an idea. And so I'm nearing the end of an expanded edition of the Mildy scale and chord studies in all keys. So that's each of the etudes transposed as far as I can to the lowest note of the instrument, and as high as I can to the upper end of the instrument. And in cases where there was only, say, one note that was out of the range, there's one, except for the last note, all the notes fall in the range of the bassoon in A major, but the last note is a super low A. So, it's just obvious you just take that A up an octave. So there are some exceptions to the range of the bassoon that way. So I hope to have that out in the next year or so. And that's been a very, very interesting project. So there are more, but sorry?
What a cool pedagogical tool.
Well, yeah, I don't think anyone my age or older would be interested in something like that, but I do think that young players might be interested in something like that.
Or the teachers of young players. The
yes,
students are covering their teachers' ears going, la, 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 la. I don't want to play that in G flat major.
Yeah. It's so funny because so some years ago, Douglas Spaniel came out with an edition of the Mildy etudes where he just superimposed new key signatures on the etudes. And there was some very negative comments on the IDRS message board. And I really took exception to it because I thought it was pretty tremendous what he had done. People saying things like, well, you don't need to practice in C sharp major because you'd never see music like that. Well, because you hardly ever see music like that is precisely why you need to practice it, because keys like that do come up in Strauss opera, Strauss tone poems, other late romantic works. And if you're going to sound fluid in them, you can't be just practicing that passage. I mean, this is really the same school of thought of why do I need to practice etudes? I just need to learn the orchestral repertoire. And, that is a recipe for staleness. And I don't really know very many players who are playing at a high level in a really good orchestra who only teach excerpts, excerpts and reed making. There's a lot more to bassoon than just that. And I feel lucky that Hertzberg and Kay Brightman, stress that in my tutelage.
It has come to our last question, believe it or not, which is, what is your advice for a young musician who aspires to have a career like yours?
Again, there's a nitty-gritty thing and then there's a general thing. The nitty-gritty thing, the thing I wish I had done in my bachelor's degree was practice before the lesson, the day of the lesson, and the day of the lesson, practice the new material after the lesson. It only kind of dawned on me after I was done with my bachelor's degree that I had practiced 6 days a week, the whole time. That on lesson days, my lessons were very early in the morning, so there was no chance to practice because I was on the road at 6:30 a.m. for an 8 o'clock lesson. And then I was so busy, then the rest of the day, there was no practicing that day. So it was always 6 days of preparation. And I just wondered if I had actually forced myself to practice twice on lesson days, that would have been a lot more practicing I got in. But then the other advice to young people, young players, is the importance of remembering that the music has got to say something, and not to focus so much on perfect intonation, technical excellence. Of course, all those things are important, especially on audition day. But the moment that you forget that their berceuse from Firebird is to lull people to sleep, that's when the audition slips out from underneath you. And yes, it has to be in tune. Yes, it has to be in time. Yes, the sound has to be nice. Yes, it has to have perfect legato. Yes, it has to have, some nice vibrato on the longer notes. But the most important thing is that it's tender. So it's that kind of thing, never forgetting the emotional content of the particular things that you're playing.
Michael, this has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences with us on Double Reed Dish.
Well, thank you both so much for inviting me to do so. It's uh I've been looking forward to it for weeks, and I knew I would get interesting questions, and it'd be a chance to go back and forth with some interesting thoughts.
We hope you enjoyed that interview with Michael Sweeney and that you will join us for our next interview, rate and review, follow us on social media. Tell us if you're going to be in Flagstaff. We'd love to come say hi to you at the conference. And, if you're in Tucson, you go find Galit and throw a glass of water on her already.
Please.
Or something. Who's going to be on the next episode?
We had a really wonderful conversation with Rebecca Scarnati, professor of oboe at Northern Arizona University and the host of the 2024 IDRS conference.
So you'll be in Arizona for the first time. It'll be like an Arizona themed episode.
Yeah, we'll have to dish something Arizona-y.
Yeah, like what would happen if you made a reed out of a prickly pear or something?
Jackie, let's end this nerd parade.
Go make reeds.